All right, I call to order the policy committee meeting, noting that members are here with Brian filling in um, for Mr. Patrick. First off, I'd like to approve agenda with that one wording or one word change.
What's the word?
Identity is changed to identify.
Oh.
It's not a big deal.
I so move with the change.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. I don't believe we have any public comments. And so we'll move right on to advertising in schools, policy 51.
All right, I'm actually going to turn it over to Steve. Steve's been working on this item as part of the process as far as advertising that's happening within some of our sporting areas, particularly softball right now. There are a few issues that came up that we ran past one of our other committees, and we felt that it was important for us to seek some advice and also look at our policies, which is really precipitating us being here this morning because we need to bring some items to the board. So, Stephen, you've done most of the work on this, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Randy. Rebecca, would you mind starting with our policy, which would be that first attachment? I just want to share as a reminder, we just worked on this policy, and what you see in the bold and underlined numbers 7 and 8 were just modified at the last board meeting. That was based on discussions we were having with the policy committee. The other thing that happened at the last board meeting is, as you recall, there was a request for advertising for the girls softball program, which was approved by the board. The group that is out there doing the fundraising has done a great job of continuing to check in with Aaron on the advertising requests that they're seeing. Aaron has been sharing them with Randy and I. We've had an opportunity to look at them. During that process, we realized it would be helpful to expand on our policy's definition of advertising. Randy has been working through the policy resource guide with the School Board Association, and we just happened to have information from them on this topic that included sample policies from other districts, as well as some just information about this topic. We realized having some additional detail in our board policy would provide clarity not only to administration, but also our community members who are out there seeking to partner with us and raise funds to improve our facilities. So rather than individuals needing to contact Aaron and then having Aaron contact us, we thought a policy revision would be our best approach to take. As an example, we did receive a request for an advertisement that Randy and I thought made sense to run that by the facility committee, which happened to meet last week. The facility committee in the past has been the committee that has approved basically fundraising efforts to improve our facilities. So it was a natural thing with that committee meeting. One of the advertisements that came up included the term brew pub. So in the discussion with the facility committee, the members felt like we wanted to bring that forward to the May board meeting to get input from all the board members. One of the facility committee board members asked if Aaron could go back to see if the term brew pub could be removed from that particular advertisement. You can see now on the screen, after we put this packet together, Aaron was able to get a revision to that request, which removed the word brew pub and replace it with kitchen. So that was one of the requests from the facility committee meeting. But back to the bigger picture, we're hoping to expand on our school board policy with clarity for both administration and the community regarding these topics so that we could move forward and have everyone understand if there are restrictions, what they look like. So we also included, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind opening up the second attachment. So this attachment is information that we received from the School Board Association. And there are sample policies that are included. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind scrolling through for a moment, we'll just find one of those sample policies. So if you want to go right there, a little bit up higher. So right there. So if you see in the middle of the screen, this is an example of what we saw on most school board sample policies. They had a statement that said the district prohibits the following. And most of these policies had a set of similar items to what you would see up here across them that they would not accept. So as an example, you see number 7 was consistent across the policies where they would not accept, let's say, X person for governor wants to pay for an advertisement in one of our facilities. This would not accept it in this district. So you could see statements like contains libelous material, false misleading claims, et cetera, et cetera. The one that would be similar to the lone girl that you did see on some of these policies is number 1. It does not prohibit advertising on behalf of businesses which sell alcohol or tobacco product as a part of their business. That was pretty common across these policies. So if we were to adopt something similar to these policies, there would be no issue with accepting advertisements from like the Lone Girl, the bowling alley, grocery stores, etc. Those would fit into these type of policies. So if you had a chance to look at them, you do see that there's a little bit of a difference in some of the different approaches taken by districts. There's a Sun Prairie, so closer to Dane County, there's one in there for Sun Prairie. You want to go to that one for a minute? Sun Prairie does have one. You want to keep going a little bit? Okay, right here. So Sun Prairie has letter F, which you don't see in the other policies. Most of what Sun Prairie has in theirs, again, is pretty consistent to what you saw in some of the other policies. But letter F, you did not see in some of those other policies. So that was one difference that we picked up on as we looked through these various policies. We also happen to have a request from an organization in our community that under the Sun Prairie policy would fall under letter F. So that's an example of one difference between the Sun Prairie policy and the others. But generally speaking, the advertising statements on what would not be accepted across most of these policies was pretty consistent. And we feel that that would give clarity of adding statements into our policy would give clarity to Aaron, to our community members as we move forward in this area. So a question for this committee is we do have 2 advertisements that we have not put up yet because we wanted to clarify the policy. And then we have example policies included here. Our thoughts were that our 851 advertising the schools could be revised pretty simply to add some statements about what our board is willing to accept as advertisements on our facilities and what we wouldn't be willing to. And again, you saw some pretty standard clauses. So as an example, this is how it could look in our policy. we could go to our advertising in the schools policy. We could throw a number 11 on there and add some language that's similar to what you see from other districts. Again, the first one was consistent where it talked about does not prohibit advertising on behalf of businesses which sell alcohol or tobacco products as an ancillary part of the business. Again, if we adopted this, we would accept the bowling alley, we would accept restaurants in the community, we would accept the grocery stores, and that would provide clarity to everyone as far as what we're okay with and what we aren't. So this is what it could look like. But really the feedback we're looking for the committee is whether or not you're willing to revise the policy we just brought forward and add something like this. You could always write it separately if you feel like it should be its own thing. And then what policy resonates with you from the ones that we included, because they're all generally speaking pretty similar, except that one statement from Sun Prairie, which that one has legal implications. So we certainly have reached out to our district law firm. Our facility committee members were looking to clarify as to what exactly is legal in this arena to make sure that we are following all applicable laws. And then there was the recent, flag case that also addressed this topic. So we want to make sure that we're current in our understanding of the laws and that any policy that we would bring forward is clearly, legal in all matters. So our attorney is still working through that because he wants to make sure that he has all of the current legal thinking behind this topic. So that review is still taking place and we will have an answer by the board meeting. But we're just looking for feedback on this concept, what you saw for sample policies, and then whether or not you think we could just take our advertising in the schools and add something similar to what you see on the screen.
I would just add to that, Steve. I do think we have to modify the policy to be more specific, because otherwise it just opens it up to everything. And you don't have an ability to really have an objective piece to kind of go point back to what you're going to approve or not approve. So I think that's a piece. Advertising for us is a relatively still new phenomenon. It really started with the baseball banners a number of years ago when we put the lights up. And then obviously now it's kind of progressed to really kind of being a standard way that some of our groups are raising funds. So I think it's a piece that it's grown to a place with advertising that we have to add more specificity. So I think the legal piece is certainly our part we'll figure out before Monday. But I think just looking for some guidance from the committee as far as some of these points. I mean, I like the piece on the top about the alcohol piece, because I think that one really is the one that probably has caused us some challenges over the time. It's kind of like, where do you draw the line? Because you have so many places that do serve it, but it's not necessarily the primary business. But it's wanting to kind of also open those things up. And I think that line does a nice job of it. Piece on religious organizations is one that we've really not done much with religious organizations over time. And promote their programs, usually because they're also in competition with us as some of the local ones. But as far as just from a religious piece, religious attitudes, we don't promote those pieces out. There are some pieces then where you get to kind of church and state type pieces. That's what our attorney's looking at as far as how does that relay when you look at advertising. But you can see the different policies. Some of them, Sun Prairie one absolutely just prohibits it and says from an advertising perspective, we're not going to advertise to a church, for example, where other ones have it that's not one of the prohibitions. So it's a piece we need to have at least a little bit of guidance from the board on what your thoughts are. And then we can kind of weigh those in with our legal opinion that we'll get before Monday, and then bring that to the board. Thought is that we bring the policy item first on the agenda so that we can address that and then address the two outstanding kind of requests for softball at a subsequent agenda item after that. And that is acceptable by our.
I guess it's important to get back on the legal aspects of the whole religious side. I totally, the alcohol one makes complete sense. I think it's a good idea to add that clarification.
I think some of the specificity is important, but I also looked at Sun Prairie seems to be so detailed. It almost jumps out at me to question some of those, where it's like, I'd like to take issue with this thing or this thing, and if it was a little broader, it might not engender that.
And Sun Prairie has a little bit different approach to it as well. When you go into like some of their schools, they'll actually name some of their rooms, if I recall, from touring in the past. So it's
The Pepsi room.
business board. I saw that in some of their past pieces. So I'm not sure if that's why they have that specificity, but there's different levels of advertising that districts do. I mean, ours is pretty much limited to a lot of our clubs and groups that are raising funds, but others use advertising as other ways to generate funds for projects.
I don't see it in any of the other ones. We've added the paid advertising is important in this policy or something else to say, okay, you're getting money. Where's that money going? Is that an obvious thing? Does it need clarification? You could use this money on something or?
I would say that's not obvious because we have some booster clubs that work through us and some that don't. So if there was interest in providing clarity on the topic of where do the funds go, like as an example, into district accounts for use, we would want to add that because when organizations are out representing us, raising funds through advertising, there's a variety of options. I mean, Randy works with the WAIF and has worked with them to be a partner with, the efforts for the football field, the soccer field, and other efforts that they have done for us. And so therefore the funds ultimately get deposited with WAIF. There's organizations that have their accounting through us. So if they are out seeking advertisements, the funds go through us. And then there's organizations that operate with private checking accounts that the only data that we currently are seeing is the form that we have filled out that Aaron brings forward for the co-curricular committee. So it's a variety of different ways. So if the board wanted clarity on that topic, that could be another thing that we would add. If as an example, you were wanting to make sure that when advertising occurs on district facilities, the deposit, for said, revenue goes through either WAIF or a district account. I mean, ultimately, we do work very closely, Aaron's office does, because when we issue the purchase orders to purchase items, we can purchase them tax exempt. So oftentimes we will act on behalf of booster clubs, purchase the items, they then reimburse us, where Aaron and his team are basically working back and forth in partnership with these organizations to make sure our dollars can go as far as they can. So that's pretty common as well. But we can set it up anyway. We can keep doing what we're doing, or if there's a desire to do it differently. I don't know, Randy, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
I do. I mean, one of the things that we've found is most of the advertising that we've done has been tied to a project. So tied to Warrior Stadium, soccer stadium, a lights project, project here at the softball field, or projects over at like baseball. It's been tied to some level of, we want to add a windscreen, we want to do something with field improvement, facility improvement. All of that usually comes through the board. That has to come to the board by policy for approval. And then as part of that, we always bring, how are they going to raise those funds? So just scroll up a little farther in the policy. Others, number 10, other special situations as approved by the superintendent or board of education. I always bring those to the board. So there's no right now fundraising that has advertising tied to it other than scoreboard stuff, which Aaron has latitude to work with. That all of that comes to the board. It's usually tied to a project. But I think I like what Ted's question is, because it's as we add more parameters to this policy, do you still want all those things coming to the board? So at least you can tie the funds to, we're advertising for this purpose, here's how it's going to be used. Because that's really how we've been operating. But that certainly wouldn't, if you just added those other pieces, it would probably give us more latitude just to, in groups of this, realize that they can do more advertising. But I think I also view these as kind of facility impacts, so that you have to be comfortable with where these are going, how they're going, not only just the people who are donating, the groups that are donating money. So probably some level of a statement, either that fundraising efforts that are going to include advertising have to have some level of scrutiny by the board. But speaking and thinking, I mean, like I look at the posters there that the teams put together. I mean, that has advertising on it as far as across the bottom of who sponsored that poster. Those don't come. Those are usually done by a booster club or some group, and then 2 or 3 businesses sponsor it. So it's a great question as far as how we're going to kind of put some controls to it. I at least initially, I'd rather it be more tightly controlled by us, so that the user has to come through administration or through the board if there's going to be something that's prominent.
Yeah, how does this affect Title IX on advertising where it's not capital, it's not equipment, it's not, does that come into effect, whether it's softball, baseball, in terms of raising funds for advertising?
So yes, is the short answer, but once the dollars are raised and whatever the project might be, the windscreen improvement at softball, field improvements maybe at the baseball field, that becomes the district's responsibility to ensure we're still complying with Title IX once that work actually gets done. And we can address that several different ways. You know, we can look at our facilities out of alignment, and then maybe do we have to make up some of that, either partnering with the other booster club to work on a project, or is there something within our own school district budgets to address maybe that differential?
All of those.
Yeah, okay. It's just a quick question. That's another committee, but I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking about that as well. I do like, I don't like working in the gray on stuff like this, so the more specific, the better. And that was my recommendation, is to take the religious issue to our attorneys first. You can get their opinions before we move forward, but I agree. I like Verona's and I like Sun Prairie's. It's just depends on.
So Steve, you pulled these as this exact, are those kind of ones that you'd be recommending? Are there, as you kind of went through and looked at the rest of the policies?
Yeah, I pulled these out because I felt that these were consistent and the language was consistent across multiple policies. And I found things like promotes organization that are in competition just makes sense, right? We wouldn't want a neighboring district to just take out an ad to support their team on our fields, right? So it's just, as you look through, these are the ones that generally were consistent across the policies and made sense. If there's other things that you saw that you think we would want to add into ours, we certainly can do that. And then the only other thing is we're certainly evaluating that letter F on the Sun Prairie one, and we'll seek to have that answer by next Monday night. But under this approach, if the board adopted this next Monday, Aaron would let the softball folks know to proceed with the lone girl advertisement that we have. And then we would get clarity on the religious organization advertisement request that we have by Monday night.
How do we, and I didn't have a problem with Brew, because again, that's what it's called. So, but they're not advertising Miller beer, just in one sign, it's a restaurant type. But that's fine too, if they wanted to make that change. How do we look upon organizations that are academic support, like Huntington Is that in competition when they do ACT prep and tutoring and, or is that not? I don't have a either way.
I'd probably say that I wouldn't do those, just because I think we offer some of the ACT prep things here. I can do obviously like Madison Country Day School.
Right.
They're obviously within our district there. For some people, they're a competitor. I would do things like that, or St. John's School, that's incorrect. Or as Steve said, I'm not going to do another sporting event or another club like that. Would be promoting like another softball club from another part of the county and competition.
Yeah, and I totally-
Those are pretty basic.
And I totally get that. I just, Huntington's not a school. It's just a business that supports students. So that's why I wanted to make sure that if something like that came in, that we were also prepared to say, that's sort of a competitor or not.
Part of a competitor. It's also a piece that we acting instructional materials piece that we do promote, like tutoring services. We don't give recommendations to, but having advertisements, that's some sort of endorsement. That's probably where I would be cautious.
I'd also be cautious then on the religious side too, because there's going to be different beliefs from different organizations, and how will that be depending on what they stand on our recent issues. How does that tie into what we're supporting them?
You're saying
this,
that particular organization stance on religious issues?
or we got one that has one stance, one on the other in the right field that has another stance.
But they're not advertised that way. You're just saying that business has.
People know who they are.
Yeah.
The religious one, I think, has a lot of pieces. I think there's establishing religion by having something that promotes it. That's part of the question. The other part is just by having an advertisement by a religious organization, is that any different than any other organization? So that's kind of the question. And I think as we posed that to our attorney, there was a few other entanglements we wanted to look at before we. And you do open it up to then all religious organizations. It's kind of, that's what you're getting. Local church would have other belief systems that come in.
Well, I'm also saying too, that depending on what the beliefs of that church or that organization being tied to our support of that organization. So as well.
That sounds pretty rare. I can't. That's.
I don't know. Well, I'll be curious about the legal part of it, but
I have a question about the original. The Northridge banner is just says Northridge Church or not, but would it be an issue if they had some kind of, I'll call it a statement of faith on that. Like, he is risen or something like that. Would that change?
yes.
Or I guess as someone who will probably be the first person to see potential advertising, I guess that would be my
I think
question.
that's part of what Kirk's looking at.
Yes.
Is it just a statement that says X church? Or does it have a statement of faith or belief? It's kind of an advertisement of promotion of faith. That's part of it.
Do we have any, with this new scrutinization, is there any problems with the baseball fields banners that are up?
No,
No.
not that no, I don't think there's any of those that they generally, Kenneth took, there was nothing in there that came. None of the other, this is the first time I think we've seen some of the advertising of this nature. And I think part of it is you have a different price point. Right? Some of the others were $5,000 a stand. So I think we just have brought different businesses to the table, which is a positive fact, but it's also brought in some more questions as far as how we're going to go.
This doesn't get into like the naming rights, or somebody wants to bring in a gift. That's separate from this policy.
So there's no naming pieces.
We're not. opening
That would, any sort of a naming piece would have to be a consideration of the board, but if you go to like, we've been asked that in the past. Innovation Center, there was a group that was going to give like 30 grand we can name it. It's like, no, money will put up get into the naming piece. Warrior Stadium, that was a question soccer stadium was, do you want to be called Public Forest to see the DMV bank? It's a big sponsor there, so that's its DMV. It's, you know, the name. So we haven't ever gone that route. But that would be something that if that was ever proposed, if it comes to that. It doesn't have that.
I just saw on somebody, one of the other ones, that once they give a gift, that it belongs to the school and they can dispose of as they wish, which brought up the Indian Bureau. What, you know, which is separate policy, but I wondered if we're gonna get into, if we need something like that. And what's given is ours now. It isn't, you don't have control of it anymore.
And I think that's probably a little different policy than the advertising is, but I think that's. Go back and look at. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, because when the dollars are assigned, and they're given to us for a purpose, but then it is up to, it's easier to explain it if you donate a item. That item now is the district. It's no longer the group that raised the money. So
And that's for the naming thing. I think you lose control. You put somebody's name on a field, on a court, on a
right.
room. You have no control about what that family's gonna do in the future of that person.
And that's why
And so, you know, I mean,
that's kind of, I guess, my personal belief is you just be cautious with that because you never know how that's going to. It's kind of where you draw the line of which ones to do. Yeah, what's your timeline with Kirk? Is he going to be getting back to you this week then before Monday's meeting?
Yes.
And then what we would look at is if the committee is comfortable with generally the parameters that you laid out. I guess I'd ask the committee to kind of endorse that with Steve's endorsement to be able to look at the religious piece and the other aspects, and then add that feedback into the policy for the board's consideration. What I would also ask is that this be a reading policy, because that is a piece as opposed to kind of going because it is pertinent with regards to these advertisers. And that request would then come subsequently later in the agenda or after this item, so we have those guidelines.
have these banners been printed, these two?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll check with Rob.
Make the motion that we approve sending this on to the full board with the clarifications, the guidance from Steve and the
Second that.
attorneys.
All in favor?
Aye.
That takes us to future meetings. We have a-
Wait, so
Just wait.
Wait till we have a new committee.
We have our
Yeah.
committee, so
Great. So that I'll look for.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
thank you for coming together on short notice. Thank you. That was pertinent.